what IGNOU is doing in specific. May I request?
I'm Dr. Pramod Kumar, and I am going to speak about the resources in agriculture, which is a part of the Indian Agricultural Development course. And coming to the resources in agriculture, to meet the increasing demand of food, fiber and fuel for burgeoning human population, fodder for animals and industrial raw materials for agro-based industries, the efficient management of natural resources is very important. We also see that there is a loss of good agricultural and land, which has been diverted towards the non-agricultural uses, and land holding is also is small in our country, and it is very scattered and fragmented. The water table is also going down due to excessive pumping of groundwater. So these are the problems which the natural resources of the country is facing, and which affects the agricultural production and productivity. So in order to meet to overcome the problems of food security, poverty, equity and sustainability, there is a need for efficient utilization of the resources of agriculture. So in this talk I am going to talk about the land resources, the water resources, livestock and fishery resources, etc. So what are these resources which are there with the country, and how we can manage these resources. So coming to the land resource, if we look at the land use classification in the country, we find that there is a lot of area agricultural land is going away from the cultivation, which has decreased from this is observed in the recent past. From the year 2000 to 2007-8, we find that the non-cultivated area has increased from 40 to 43%. This is basically because of the urbanization which is taking place, because of which the cultivable land is diverted for construction of buildings, roads and other infrastructure. And this has an impact on the net sown area. As a result, the net sown area is falling, and we find that in the recent year it has fallen from 142 million hectare to 140 million hectare, and this is a great cause of concern, because this will have an effect on the production and productivity. The net irrigated area has also increased in the recent past, but the pace of increase is not that much, and there is a lot of potential is there for exploitation and to bring more area under irrigation, which needs to be done. The land resources of the country is facing facing a lot of problems, and these problems could be classified into various categories. The problem of soil erosion by water. So certain portion of the land resource of the country is faced by the soil erosion, is eroded. The topsoil of the land is eroded because of the water, and the area which is subjected to such a problem is 119 million hectares, which is quite a huge land resource which is subjected to water soil erosion because of the water. And this is mainly because of the deforestation which is taking place, the developmental activity which is taking place, and this shifting cultivation which is practiced in many parts of the country. So because of which the topsoil, the very precious topsoil of the land resources is being eroded by the water. Next type of problem which the land resources face is the wind erosion. And many part of the country, especially the northwestern part of the country, that is the regions, the states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, Punjab and Haryana, there we find this kind of soil, wind erosion, and precious land is eroded, which has an effect on the production and productivity. And the total magnitude of the area which is coming under this type of erosion is the 13.5 million hectare. And next is the salt affected soils. So many portion of the land is affected by the salt, and this is basically because of the rise in the groundwater table, because of and basically we observe in the canal irrigated areas, and the states where we find this type of problem is the UP, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, Punjab, Maharashtra. So these are the regions where we find salt affected soils, and the magnitude of this type of soil problematic soils are 8.5 million hectares. And finally the water logging. So the certain significant portion of the land is also affected by water logging, ravine lands and shifting cultivation and others. So these are the problem lands which needs to be managed, and so as to make them usable, and in order to increase the production and productivity of agriculture. If we look at the average size of land holding under different size classes, because land holding is one of the important factors for which has a bearing on the mechanization which can be taken up in the agricultural land, or which and if the higher input use can be made, that is the and we observe that there is a fragmentation in the land holding which is taking place over the years, as well as which has resulted in as a result the holding average size of holding has fallen from 2.28 hectares to 1.32 hectares. So the average size of land holding has falling over the period, and it has fallen to 1.32 hectares. And this is observed in across all size group of farmers, and this is because of a rise in the population, which has led to the fragmentation in the land holding, and this has an impact on the reduction in the average size of holding. And once the average size of holding is small, it is very difficult to take up mechanization, and modern cultivation is difficult to be taken up in such lands. So this has an implication, and this needs to be checked, and in order to see that the land holding, average size of land holding is increased over the period. Now there are a number of land reforms have been taken up by the government from time to time, and since independence number of land reforms have been taken, and the reforms is of three types. That is, the first is the abolition of the intermediaries, second is the regulation of the size of holding through the imposition of ceiling of land holdings, and redistribution through land consolidation, and thirdly is settlement and regulation of tenancy. So these are the three types of land reforms which have been taken up by the government from time to time since independence. If we look at the abolition of the intermediaries, what do we mean by the intermediaries is, just after independence, before independence, we found that their large part of the agricultural land was held by the systems, intermediaries, and the systems prevailing at that time were Zamindari, Mahalwadi and Raitwari systems were prevailing, and the agricultural land or the cultivable land were held under the intermediaries. So steps were taken to overcome or remove these intermediaries. Tenant farmers who tilled these lands were burdened with high rents and other forms of exploitation. So under these systems of Zamindari, Mahalwadi and Raitwari, we found that the tenant farmers who tilled the lands were burdened with high rents and other forms of exploitation. So in order to overcome this, the act was passed in order to abolish the intermediaries, and the common principle which was adopted to abolish this system was not to have any intermediary between the government and the tenant or the cultivator, and the payment of compensation to the owner. So these were the two methods which were adopted in taking a step to abolish the intermediaries, and 20 million cultivators became owners as a result of this act. Land reform. 20 million cultivators became owners of the land, and they tilled, and and 58 lakh hectares got redistributed among the landless laborers. So this was the impact of this particular land reform which was taken up. Second was the regulation of land holding size. So by 1961-62, all states had passed laws enforcing ceiling on land holding. So there was a ceiling on land holding was imposed under this act, and this was passed from 1961-62 onwards. And the ceiling specification differed across the states and on category of land and crop, and it varied from crop to crop. So the law which was passed, the ceiling specifications which were offered by the various states varied across the land and crop, varied from crop to crop. The land owning unit also varies. In some state it was the family was considered as a unit, and in other case the individual landowners were considered as unit. So this also varies. There was a variation across the states. So new policy, in order to overcome these gaps, a new policy was introduced in the year 1971 to bring uniformity with the unit holding for family of 5. So as regards to unit holding, it was made as family of 5 was considered as a unit, and the ceiling cap was put at 28 acres in case of wetlands and 54 acres in case of unirrigated lands. So uniformity was laid with the 1971 act. Then large landholders took advantage of, but even though this act was passed in order to put a ceiling on landholding, the large landholders, they took advantage of the loopholes which are prevalent in the law, and lack of efficient land record systems were not prevalent. So this was taken advantage of by the large landholders, and they underreported the land holding which they had, and they also transferred the land in the name of fictitious and benami holders. So by this way, the land reform which was taken up to put a check on the land holding, size of land holding, was obviated, and people could not much benefit could be realized as a result of this. Next was the tenancy reform. Under the tenancy reforms, we find it was taken up in 3 forms, that is the regulation of rent, then security of tenure, and ownership rights to the tenants. So these were the 3 forms in which the tenancy reform was taken up. That is the regulation of rent, that is in first 5-year plan itself, the rent should not exceed, so a condition was imposed that the rent should not exceed 1/5 or to 1/4 of the total produce. That is 20 to 25% of the total produce should become the rent. It should lie only between this, and it should not exceed beyond this as far as the rent is concerned, which has to be paid by the tenant to the owner of the land. All the states enacted laws on these lines, and this was enforced. Then second form of tenancy reform was in form of security of tenure. That is, this type of tenancy reform meant that to prevent unlawful eviction of the tenants. That means the security was provided to the tenants that they would continue to own the land and till the land and earn the income. So it was meant to prevent the unlawful eviction of the tenants, allow resumption of land by the owner only for personal cultivation. So the resumption of the land by the owner could be only when in the situation when he wants to cultivate the land on his own. Thirdly, ensure that tenants are assured the prescribed minimum area in the event of eviction. In the event of eviction, they need to be provided a minimum area of land so as to earn a reasonable amount of income. Next, let us come to the water resources. Let us look at the various types of water resources which are present in the country, what type of problem we have, and how we can overcome these problems. So water resource, it is the most critical input of agricultural productivity, as we all know, and increasing water demand. We also observe that there is increasing water demand from agriculture, domestic and industrial sector. So from all fronts there is an increasing demand for water, and the share of water use for other than agriculture is going which was 13% in 1985 is likely to increase by 25% in 2025. So from other uses of agriculture, the demand is going to grow, so that will have an impact on the amount of water which will be available for agricultural purposes. We also find that the number of tube wells in Punjab and other parts of the country has increased during the last three to 4 decades, leading to overexploitation of groundwater. So the overexploitation of groundwater is another cause of concern, because that is leading to reduction in the groundwater table, and which has an impact on bearing on the availability of water in future. So among the water resources, we get mainly the water from through the rainfall, and in our country annual precipitation including snowfall is to the tune of 400 million hectare meter, and rainfall in our country is highly variable and irregular and unpredictable, and widespread variation is observed across the country, which varies from 100 millimeter in Rajasthan to 1100 millimeter in Cherrapunji, Meghalaya. Monsoon through which the rainfall is received in the country, and in most part of the country it is the southwest monsoon which brings rainfall, and only in Tamil Nadu we find that the major portion of rainfall is received from the northeast monsoon. Coming to the surface water resources, there we find that the total catchment of river systems in the country is 252 million hectares. So that is the total catchment of the river system. And the water resource of the country occurring as a natural runoff in the rivers is 1869 cubic kilometer. So 1869 cubic kilometer is the total amount of natural runoff in the river system which is observed. And the Ganga, Brahmaputra and Meghna system, river system, accounts for 60% of the total resource potential of the various rivers. So this system accounts for the 60%. Only the rest of the river systems, they account for 40% of the resource potential in the form of runoff in the rivers. And out of this 1869 cubic kilometers of runoff water in the rivers, only 1122 cubic kilometer is the total potential out of this, which is can be used for beneficial purposes, and the rest of it is not used for the beneficial purposes. The other source of irrigation, the water, is the water bodies and storages. So these are the other sources of water resources in the country, other form of water resource in the country. Out of the water bodies, we all know that the tanks and ponds were excavated in India during the Ashoka period. So right from the Ashoka period, we hear that the tanks and ponds were excavated, and water bodies were created which were used for irrigation purposes. The tanks and ponds they serve the purpose of life-saving irrigation. So life-saving irrigation could be provided to the field crops from the water which is present in the tanks and ponds, and also it also helps in the groundwater recharge. So the rainfall water is captured in the tanks and ponds, and slowly it percolates down the ground, and that is how the groundwater recharge takes place. So these tanks and ponds are very essential for groundwater recharge. Inland water resources excluding rivers and canals is to the tune of 7 million hectares, and we also find other forms of water bodies, water resources, that is rivers and canals. UP has the longest length of rivers and canals. Then tanks and ponds, we find the area under tanks and ponds is 2.3 hectare meter of water is there available through tanks and ponds, and most of it lies in the southern states of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So the tanks and ponds are basically prevalent in the Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, these southern regions. Then other form of water bodies, the reservoirs. So they account for 2.1 million hectares of water, and the states where these kind of reservoirs have found is the Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Maharashtra, Rajasthan and UP. So these are the states where reservoirs are found which store water and is available for beneficial uses. Then lakes, beels and derelict water bodies are also observed to be good source of water, and they are found in the states of Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And brackish water is another water resource which is found in the states of Odisha, West Bengal and Kerala. And these various forms of water bodies are utilized for various beneficial purposes for irrigation and for fish cultivation, etc. Then coming to the groundwater resources of the country, the total water resource potential, both groundwater and surface water, is to the tune of 186.9 million hectare meter, and out of this the replenishable groundwater is to the tune of 43.1 million hectare meter per year. So this is the replenishable groundwater which can be utilized, efficiently utilized for for agriculture and various other purposes. However, many states are facing depleting groundwater status, resulting in lowering of groundwater table. So the lowering of groundwater table is observed in many parts of the country, basically because of overexploitation of groundwater. And this is phenomenon is basically observed in the states of Punjab, Haryana, Tamil Nadu and Rajasthan, wherein excessive groundwater exploitation is taking place. So it has to be judiciously utilized, and to the tune where the replenishment rate is of groundwater is there, recharge is there, to that tune we can utilize the groundwater, and this has to be monitored and efficiently utilized. There are other parts of the country, there are other states, other regions in the country where there is an immense potential of improving the agricultural productivity through groundwater exploitation. There are various parts where the groundwater position situation is quite good, and there is a need for exploitation of this groundwater potential in order to raise the agricultural productivity. And the states where this phenomenon is observed is the Assam, Bihar, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh and northeastern states. So these are the regions where the groundwater potential is good and needs to be exploited in order to improve the agricultural productivity. And in other states, the states where the groundwater table is receding and excessive groundwater exploitation is there is a need to put a check and to judicially use the groundwater resources. If we look at the various forms of the water resources across which is available across the size group of farmers, we find that it is almost uniformly spread. So the access to various forms of irrigation sources is uniformly available to the various size group of farmers. However, the large farmers have access to good source of irrigation available in the form of canals and tube wells, which is considered to be a very where the risk is less, and which helps in improving the productivity, whereas the marginal and small farmers, they have access to the other forms of irrigation sources also, apart from the canals and tube wells, but the proportion is relatively less than that which is available to the large farmers. But the difference is not very much, and we can say that it is uniformly spread across the various size classes of farmers. So there is no much inequity in the availability of water resources for across the size group of farmers. Then in order to efficiently utilize or efficiently plan for the development in the country has been divided into 15 agroclimatic zones, and the planning is being done both at the state level and the national level, taking into account the agroclimatic zones of the country, so as to have uniformity and to re-strengthen the efforts of the national and state planning. And further, these 15 agroclimatic zones have been classified into 126 agroclimatic zones by the ICR in order to efficiently plan for the crop production and productivity, and in order to raise the productivity of the agriculture sector. The next resource which we are going to talk about is the labor resource. And the Indian agriculture, as we all know, is predominantly agrarian in nature, and the agriculture continues to be the most dominant employer. The poorest of the poor are concentrated in the rural areas and are engaged in agriculture and non-agricultural occupations. So the poorest of the poor are concentrated in the rural area, and the landless laborers and small and marginal farmers are the most vulnerable. The landless labor is found to be at the bottom of this ladder. The dire poverty, absence of stability of employment, and seasonal nature of work make it extremely difficult and make it impossible for agricultural laborers to organize. So the agricultural laborers are found to be unorganized, and this is mainly because of the problem that they are faced with the poverty and seasonal nature of work, and they do not come in contact with each other. So these are the reasons why the agricultural laborers are unorganized. The classification of labor is concerned, or if we try to understand labor as to how we can, what is the meaning of laborers, then there are three main categories of laborers, that is the cultivators, the agricultural labor, and the workers. The cultivators are those who work on their own. So they work on their own, that may be on the leased or the mortgaged land for themselves, and they work for themselves. Agricultural laborers, on the other hand, are those who work on another person's land for wages, for money, kind, or share. So they may get the wages in the either of these forms, that is money, kind, or share. Workers, on the other hand, are engaged in forest, they are engaged in fishing and livestock sector, and they work for the wages. On the basis of then we can also classify the laborers in two, that is, this classification is based on the number of days they work in a year, and the workers could be classified as main workers and marginal workers. The main workers, they get engaged in the engaged and they are employed for more than 183 days in a year, whereas the marginal workers, they get employed for less than 183 days in a year. So this is the way in which we can classify laborers and understand what is the meaning of labor. Coming to the workers engaged in agricultural activities in rural India, if we try to look at, then try to understand, then we find that the number of workers has increased over the years during the two decadal periods, that is 1991 census period and 2001 census period. We find that the number of workers have increased over the periods from 314 to 403, and we also observe that the marginalization of workers has taken place. That is, there is a shift from main worker to marginal worker. That is, the proportion of marginal worker has increased during this period, and the proportion of main worker has come down, whereas the proportion of marginal workers has increased. That means there is a shift from the main worker to marginal worker, and as we know that the marginal worker are the ones who are prone to exploitation. They get employed for lesser number of days in a year, and they are also subject to they also get lower wages than the main workers. So this is quite a concerning situation. This shift is a concerning situation, and steps need to be taken to see that there is improvement in the condition of the workers. Distribution of agricultural laborers, if we look at, then the agricultural laborer in the rural area is employed in many forms. That is, the cultivators, agricultural laborers, household industry workers. There are a number of industrial activities which take place in the rural area. So those employed in this sector is the meaning by the household industry workers, and then there are other workers. And we observe that the cultivators and agricultural laborers are the major forms of laborers which are found in the rural area, and major forms of employment, and it is amounting to 73% of the total workforce in the rural area. And the agricultural labor also amounts to the substantial part, and the female workers also account for the substantial portion of the labor workforce which is found in the rural sector. Let us look at the characteristics of the agriculture worker as to what are the characteristics of agricultural labor which differentiate it from the industrial worker. So the first is the agricultural laborers are unorganized. They are not organized. since they are not coming in the direct contact, they are also their job is also seasonality based. It's not a regular one, so that as a result they are not organized as against the industrial workers who are better organized. The next is the agricultural laborers are unskilled in nature. So because they are unskilled, the employers, they get the terms of employment get dictated by the employers, and they get lower wages as against what they are supposed to get. And the third is the migratory in character. The agricultural laborers are migratory in nature. That means the employer can get the laborers on their farm from the other parts of the country, other places other than their native place. And the agricultural laborers can also move out in order to find the labor employment. So they are migratory in nature. Agricultural labor is hardly covered by any rules or regulations. So this is another important factor, that since they are unorganized, the rules and regulations, even though they are framed, it is very difficult to enforce. So the enforcement is also difficult. There is a difficulty in framing rules and regulations, and once it is framed, it is very difficult to enforce also. So these are the characteristics of agricultural labor which differentiates it from the industrial worker. Coming to the economic condition of agricultural laborers, so the land ownership is one of the important factors. Most of the time the agricultural laborers do not have the land, they do not possess land, so the land ownership is one of their concerns. Then second is the wages and income. The wages get dictated by the terms of employment. The laborer may be employed on a seasonal basis, or he may be employed on a casual basis. If he is employed on a casual basis, the amount of wage he receives is less than that when he is employed than the seasonal worker. So the amount of wage which he receives is also low. The third is the unemployment. Most of the time we find that there is a disguised unemployment. So in agriculture sector we find as the problem of disguised unemployment, though there is no need for the labor in the agriculture sector, or even the productivity would remain same even if we remove a portion of the labor force. So this is what is the called as the disguised unemployment. So this situation also brings down the amount of wage which they get and the income which they earn, the laborers they earn. Then is the problem of social deprivation and social insecurity. And social insecurity is because they can be removed any time from the employment, and they are employed when there is a need for the labor on the farm. And also because of the seasonality which is prevalent in the agriculture sector, they are employed only in the part of the season, part of the year, and the rest of the part they are not employed. So these the other factor is when they grow old, the laborers they grow old, there is this insecurity that they would remain employed. And so these are the forms of social insecurity which is attached with the agricultural labor, which has a impact on the living condition of the agricultural laborers. There are a number of measures which have been taken, which are being taken up by the government to support the laborers. So the first one is the fixation of minimum wages. Then there is a special area programs are being taken up by the government. Then land reclamation and settlement is being taken up by the government. Then rural employment programs are being launched. Then abolition of bonded labor is another important step which has been taken up by the government. The insurance, then the group insurance is being provided by the LIC to the tune of rupees 1000 for the labor, which covers the entire family, and the premium amount is rupees 10 per year, which is being paid by the government. So insurance has also been taken up in order to insure the agricultural laborers. Then financial body has been created for backward classes, so that the people from backward classes could take loan to the tune of 25 lakhs for taking up various enterprises. So these are the measures which have been taken up by the government in order to support the laborers. Then there are a number of acts have been enacted by the government in order to protect the agricultural laborers. So the first one is the Workmen's Compensation Act 1923, which was enacted in 1923. This means that the workers would be compensated in case they suffer from injury or death while on work. So this is what has this Workmen's Work Compensation Act has brought in. The second one is the Minimum Wages Act which was enacted in 1948. As a result of this, the minimum wages has been fixed by the government, and it has been enacted by the various state governments also. And this provides that the employer has to provide to the laborers or the employers to a minimum wage, so that they can, which is a substantial amount for good living for the workers. The third act is the Maternity Benefit Act, which was passed in the year 1961, and this has been enacted because in order to protect the female workers who in the event of pregnancy are unable to work or continue to work, and they get certain amount of they continue to get certain amount of remuneration, and they do not lose job at the time of when they are under this special situation of pregnancy. Then second is the fourth one is the Equal Remuneration Act, which was passed in the year 1978, and this is meant for providing equal wage to equal kind of job. So this brings about the parity between the female and male workers, and if the amount of work or the type of work is same, the people are supposed to get equal type of wages, equal amount of wages. Then the final one is the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act. So this was the major initiative by the government, which has abolished the bonded labor, and they have released the bonded labor, and the system of bonded labor no more prevails as a result of this act, and the laborers are freed from the bonded system. Number of schemes and programs for the betterment of agricultural labor has been passed and formulated and has been implemented by the government in order to improve the condition of the agricultural laborers. Among the various programs, the National Food for Work program, then there was Swarna Jayanti Gram Swarojgar Yojana, Sampurna Gramin Rozgar Yojana, Rural Housing Indira Awas Yojana. Under this program, the poor rural poor were provided with houses free of cost. And then Pradhan Mantri Gramodaya Yojana, then Prime Minister's Rozgar Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana. Then we have programs like meant for special reasons, that is focused on special reasons, that is drought prone area program, desert development program, and integrated wasteland development program. Antyodaya Anna Yojana is another program which provides food at a very cheaper rate, or food grains at a very cheaper rate to the rural poor. Then National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which was passed in the year 2005. Coming to the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, if we look at it was launched in the year 2006, and it covered 200 most backward districts in the country, and it was expanded in 330 districts during 2007 and 8, and the coverage was extended to all rural districts of the country in the year 2008 and 9. So finally all the districts in the country was covered under this program, was brought under this program. Presently 619 districts are covered with 4.51 crores households provided with employment. So 4.51 crore households have been provided with employment under this scheme. Then we have Swarna Jayanti Gram Swarojgar Yojana. It was launched in the year 1999 after restructuring IRDP and allied programs. So the IRDP and allied programs were restructured. The self-employment program, it is a self-employment program for the rural poor. Objective is to bring assisted Swarojgaris. So the Swarojgaris which were assisted need to be were brought under this program in order to uplift them above the poverty line by providing them income generating assets from bank credit and government subsidy. So the bank credit and government subsidy was provided to have income generating assets by the Swarojgaris. And up to December 2009, 36.78 lakh SHGs have been formed, covering 132 lakh Swarojgaris have been assisted under this program. So these were the various programs which are enacted by the government in order to uplift the labor force or the condition of the agricultural workers. Next resource is the livestock and fisheries resources. Under the livestock and fisheries resources, we find that the livestock resources in the country comprises of the following, that is the cattle and buffaloes, sheep, goat, poultry, pigs, camel, equines, rabbitry, dairying and beekeeping. These are the various forms of livestock resources which are present in the country. Cattle and buffaloes, if we look at the animal husbandry is an adjunct to agriculture. Cattle and buffaloes are kept for milk production in the country as a source of power for various farm operations, village transport, irrigation and production of manures. The animals are generally maintained on agricultural byproducts and crop residues. If we look at the livestock population in the country, then over the years the livestock population has been increasing over the years. However, the cattle population has declined during the last 2 decades, that is 1992 to 2003. This is mainly because of the mechanization, and we also find that the horses and pines and donkeys population has decreased, whereas that of mules has increased. But however, over the total livestock population has increased over the years, and that of poultry as well has increased. This brings this has also raised the productivity from major livestock products, which we find which has increased. The milk production has increased tremendously over the period, and eggs production and fish and wool production has also increased over the period. This has been possible because of the efficient management of the livestock resources in the country. And fisheries resources also, there are 2 types of fisheries resources prevalent in the country, that is marine resources and the inland fisheries resources. And there is a need for efficient management of the various resources which are present in the country, and in order to improve the production, to provide the fuel and food requirement of the country, of the population of the country, we need to better utilize these resources, that is all these resources, land, water, the livestock resources. And with this, I thank you for listening to the lecture.